Okay, I apologize. This meeting is a little late and we had some technical issues. We're gonna run through things a little fast at the start to catch up, because I know we're a little late. So the first things are the agenda for today. If you guys have your packet in front of you, the very first item. So this is, again, it's about a 2-hour meeting. Today we're gonna go over the code and plan concepts for this meeting. We're going to look at the bylaws, then I'll have a presentation for you. We'll have the break, as per usual, might be a shorter break this time. So we'll go over the key priorities before the break, and then after the break, we'll actually go into the concepts part of this presentation. So the first thing after the agenda in your packet is the bylaws. I just want to confirm that there are no changes to the bylaws. This will be going back to our planning commission for actual approval, probably in September, at our September 16th meeting. So, nothing's changed, but it's just a confirmation from everybody present that the bylaws have yet to be approved. So if you have any amendments or changes to those bylaws, I should hear about it now. And we will go from there. So any changes or questions about the bylaws? I know you guys saw them at your last presentation. No? Hearing none. Perfect. Okay. The next thing in your packet, and I hope you guys got one, but maybe you didn't, was, I apologize, you didn't. This, I printed it for everybody again, is the conflict of interest statement from Christina, our city attorney. If you all remember.
I got it from last time.
Yep, you'll have to declare any potential conflicts of interest at any meeting. So just making sure you guys have it. We have to do it for every meeting. And where is the sign-in sheet? Down here. So I'm gonna send the sign-in sheet back around, but I'll have you guys declare potential conflicts of interest as we're supposed to with every potential meeting. Does anybody need a reminder about what a potential conflict of interest is? No? Okay. We're gonna skip over John Aaron because I know that he is not here today. Anna Backus, are you here at the meeting?
She's out of town. So.
Okay. Basil, any potential conflicts of interest? Okay, just to declare that for the recording. Charles Clark is absent. Amanda Donofrio, also absent. Mike Dotson for potential conflicts of interest.
No conflicts.
Okay. Rob Evans.
Conflicts. By the way, it's 2 Bs.
Oh, I think I have that here. Okay. It is 2 Bs, ROBB.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Barrington, any potential conflicts of interest?
I have a potential.
Jenna Ribley, you can hear us.
I can hear you now. Yay.
Awesome. Any potential conflicts of interest, please?
I don't remember how we did this last time.
So
we said like no conflicts, but you know, potential.
when an official takes action that could have a financial impact on that official, the official's relative, or a business with which the official or the relative of that official is associated. So usually we say, like, if you're in the architecture or landscape architecture or economist, whatever, how that could potentially impact your business or the business of others.
Right. Last time we had some sort of way that everyone said it. Like, I don't have any direct conflicts of interest, but depending on the, you know, whatever output of this, I have overlapping interest.
Pat.
No conflicts of interest.
Nicole Matthews. Hearing none. Holly Nuevo is absent. Pranav Patel. Any potential conflicts of interest? Okay. Chip Radava. Conflicts of interest.
Not that I can think of really.
Okay. John Schmidt. Any potential conflicts of interest?
I'm with Jenna on that.
Okay. Darian Wheeler. Any potential conflicts of interest?
I have no conflicts of interest.
And Edward Zachrach. Any potential conflicts of interest?
Negative.
All right, moving on to the next item on the menu, and if you wouldn't mind just signing in, if you are here and present, just sign your name on the sign-in sheet. For anybody who is attending virtually, we will make sure that we get your name down. for tonight. Okay. The next thing on the menu is approving the TAC meeting number 1 minutes. It's the third thing in your meeting packet for tonight. It'll just say the TAC meeting minutes. So hopefully you guys have had a chance to look over this. If you have any edits or comments or questions, now's the time to declare anything that might need to be changed about the minutes from the first meeting. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to look it over in case you haven't already.
Just spelling.
Just spelling?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Got it. Okay, everybody good on the minutes? Any questions, comments? Rob just reminded me that it's 2 Bs. So we'll get that fixed. For the next one. All right, I'm gonna jump right into the presentation and start sharing my screen. I know we're a little behind. Okay. So talked about the agenda. Okay, we're gonna jump right in. Okay. So the presentation, actually, I'll go back to the. Okay. So tonight, the agenda includes a discussion on exploring the allowance of more housing in our mixed use and commercial districts. We'll provide some context or background information on the project, how the project was guided by past plans and community input. And the key barriers to housing production discussed in the Housing and Design Code and Plan Audit, which we took to the Planning Commission and City Council this last May. That's on our website. If you guys want to review those materials. Next, we'll go over the key issues and priorities to get a sense of what your key priorities are. So if you're here in the room, there's a poster over here with the key priorities. It's the same thing on the slides. During our break, if we get a chance, I'll ask you guys to add a sticky note or a pin to what your key priorities are so I can get a sense of that. And then the next or last part of the presentation this evening will be where we should be exploring these code concepts. That's the poster at the end of the room. Again, at our break, I'll be asking you guys to put a pin in the map where you guys would like to consider more housing in those areas in particular. So as a lot of you know, Springfield's growing. As a planner, our job is to plan for what's needed to support that growth in a way that reflects Springfield's values. So that's why we're here today, is to hear from all of you about your priorities when it comes to building more housing in our commercial and mixed use districts. Just a heads up, I have taken these code concepts, a lot of the maps forward at a few events the last couple of weeks. It's gone to our governance committee at the end of July, so we got feedback, and that's why you're seeing some of the things in the presentation tonight. In case you haven't already watched that recording, it is up on Springfield Oregon Speaks. And then I'm hearing from you guys tonight. Also, if you guys agree and like the concepts, and then we'll move forward with that, or we'll make some amendments as we work through this project. So far, this project has been guided by our past plans and community input. We have adopted plans and policies that guide where and how Springfield should grow based on our community priorities. They include the comprehensive plan and neighborhood refinement plans. Other initiatives also explored ways that Springfield could potentially change its planning framework for allowed uses and design standards. And this project will build on that foundation by using the direction from past efforts, along with your input and the input of the community, to update the development code and better meet Springfield's housing needs. So as some of you know, I shared our Springfield housing strategy with you at the last meeting. but I'll just go over in particular some of those important statistics that you might not know. So we found that too few homes are being built and that we need roughly 470 new homes every year to meet the targets set by the state. We also found that many households struggle to afford housing, with 44% of renters and 24% of homeowners spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So a refresher on what was in the code and plan audit that I presented to the Planning Commission and City Council. In the audit, they found a few key barriers to housing production. They were that housing as a standalone use is generally not allowed in most of our mixed use or commercial districts. That where mixed use development is allowed, it is often economically infeasible to build. A lot of you guys who are in development or finance know that it can be frustrating or impossible to make a mixed use project pencil. That most development standards would allow for higher density housing, but adjustments are needed to the development code to allow additional height, setbacks, or lot coverage. And that they found that the design standards and regulations for how Springfield uses its land in the mixed use districts could be simpler and more streamlined. Let's remember that a lot of these code standards haven't been adopted or amended in many years. We're now going to move on to our key issues and priorities. So, when you think about ways to make housing easier to build in our mixed use or commercial districts, what are your key priorities? So on the screen, you can see that there are 4 examples, including economic development, context-sensitive design, strategic growth, and build homes faster. These priorities often overlap and they can work together, which is what we want to hear from you, what you consider to be the most important priority. For economic development, if this is your priority, your perspective might be, number 1, that we preserve enough land for future employment growth to meet state planning goals. Number 2, to keep areas already zoned for commercial uses focused on employment rather than housing. Or number 3, you acknowledge that some types of businesses like auto repair, distribution, or manufacturing may not necessarily be compatible with housing. If your priority is context-sensitive design, your perspective might be 1, where taller or more intense housing is allowed, it should transition in height and scale to match adjacent homes and neighborhoods. So if the building on a property is 35 feet and it's a commercial property and you want to build housing on that property and the abutting property is residential, then the maximum height should also be 35 feet to match the abutting height of the neighboring property. Number 2, development shouldn't take away from the character of commercial areas. To do this, active storefront should still front on the street. So that means you're still going to want commercial on the street. Maybe you'd allow residential behind it or above it. And then number 3, housing along busier streets need to be developed in a way that ensures safety and livability for residents. Think about where our commercial districts are in Springfield, and would you want housing in those areas? Is it safe for pedestrians, accounting for traffic and existing businesses in those areas? If your priority is strategic growth, your perspective might be, number 1, can we encourage more housing in areas where people can walk, bike, or take transit to meet their daily needs? Number 2, can we support growth in places that already have or are planned to have infrastructure and amenities? Infrastructure costs a bit when it comes to development, so we're factoring that in when it comes to where we would allow that development. And then number 3, allow higher density housing and mixed use buildings so more people can live close to amenities and services. And then the last one, if your priority is to build homes faster, then your perspective might be 1, the top priority is increasing the overall supply of housing to meet demand. So housing takes precedence over economic development. Number 2, housing should be allowed wherever it can be built feasibly and efficiently. And number 3, flexibility in the location, design, and zoning is critical to speed up production. So again, we're going to be allowing housing in areas where we typically don't allow housing. Okay, so some discussion questions. I'm gonna be hearing from you, so feel free to raise your hand. Just gonna read them real quick and then we'll go from there. So number one, what key position or priorities resonate with you and why? What challenges or opportunities do you see if housing is added in places that currently have a predominantly commercial use? And number three, are there places that you believe are best suited for housing growth based on what you know of Springfield? And take a minute. Feel free to raise your hand. The original priorities, everybody can see them on the screen. So that might help a little bit too. Yes, Pat.
As you were going through those, I was kind of bridging between number one and number three. And thinking about the concept of trying to coordinate housing near where people work. So it isn't necessarily taking land away from business growth or jobs, it's actually locating workers closer to where they work. Which is kind of a similar area to housing that's near transit and walkable areas, so the housing is closer to things that people living there are gonna need and use. Just throwing in the concept there of where they work as well,
Yeah.
close to where they live.
Yeah,
I agree with that. And I think having denser housing near these commercial areas, bringing more people closer to where they can work. I think just like in Springfield, there's not much land just to build regular single family housing, and being able to put it in a denser building, house more people would be better.
I'm kind of under the impression that if we build homes faster, it will affect our economic development. We don't have enough housing for people to live in if a big company was to come and build here. So that is a detriment to our economic development, not having them faster. And I think we need to do it in a strategic way. So but I personally, I think that building the homes, getting those numbers up has got to be our key priority.
I agree with that. Just that we're not facing a commercial housing or commercial or retail shortage. We're facing a housing shortage. So we need to shift the priorities there a little bit. So I like the last component of that, and that flexibility in location design and zoning is critical. But that can also be tied in a little bit with the strategic growth stuff as well.
and we'll get into that when we get to the concepts. I'll show you guys some areas where we already allow a mix of uses, or where we could potentially allow some mix of uses.
I think it's the types too, and we generalize housing. But there's a lot of apartments coming in. I mean, I've been involved in some projects where they're putting a lot of apartments, so rental coming online. But for home ownership, affordable home ownership, I think that's, when we talk about housing, that's harder to do in just for mixed use, because that's probably gonna be a condo format. And so if that's where it's going, where they're attached units, they're not on independent lots. So I think we're going condo where you can own the unit and you're in an association. Making sure that code would allow that to definitely be important. And I've seen conversions in downtown Eugene that were not apartments or not housing, went to apartments, office conversions. And now if you look in Orland, you can see all the individual tax lots. They're like vertical. So that mix of housing, allowing single family detached that's affordable, which is in desperate short supply, but attached housing that they own too. all floors and then the different versions. That's a challenge for Springfield or Eugene or anyone really.
Yeah, and like I mentioned at the start of the presentation, what you're gonna find is most of the time in Springfield, we don't allow housing in our commercial areas. It's pretty much not allowed unless you're in a mixed use area. And I'll show on one of the maps, you should have it in your packet too. If you looked at your packet, the areas where we actually allow housing in commercial areas, it's pretty much limited to one area of Springfield that isn't already a mixed use area. So, and if you're not familiar with our mixed use areas, in general, they're downtown, Mohawk, and Glenwood. There's also some owned up by Riverbend. So those are pretty much the only mixed use areas that we have currently in Springfield. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Jenna. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes. So, obviously, like, you know, balancing all of these things are the ideal outcome, right? But I think in response to the kind of housing and commercial and having more housing near the commercial so that people can live where they work. Well, it's also kind of the flip side. We need housing near commercial to support the commercial. That's really important. For example, in downtown, I know it's our use, but it's hard to support retail and support businesses in the downtown core if we don't have enough people there, right? So having people that actually live in an area day than people who are driving through and, you know, maybe stopping during the day or over lunch or something. So um, I think it's absolutely a good priority. The one challenge, I don't know if we're getting to challenges, very significant challenge in certain areas, at least maybe not all of these areas, is when you bring housing in, there's always a concern for parking. I mean, obviously I'm coming more from the downtown perspective. Parking is always such a big hot item for people. And so, making sure that that is addressed, whether that is addressed through public education about different transportation options or whether that's addressed through providing parking. But
Jenna? Yeah, and on that parking comment, so we're gonna hear tonight about the climate friendly areas, but under the umbrella of the climate friendly areas, there's the climate friendly and equitable communities umbrella. Last year, the year before, we had to amend our code for parking mandates. That means that technically, under state law and under the Springfield Development Code, we can no longer require parking. So it is up to the property owner or the developer to provide that parking to begin with. So that is in our code. Anybody has questions about that? Yes, babe.
I'm hearing a lot of things that I resonate with, and all the points are ones that all have merit. I think in my own personal opinion, I use a lot of our transportation services. I bike and I use the bus quite frequently. And I think it is important to recognize that while we are a very auto-centric town within the Eugene Metro and Springfield area, it is possible to live your life meaningfully and happily while using transit. And that we can change the narrative from, discussions of parking and where we're locating housing in relation to employment opportunities to say that we have invested in our transportation and that you can live within the metro area and still be able to support yourself.
Anybody that I haven't heard from who wants to comment? I know you guys probably have some thoughts, some feedback. Or maybe not, maybe you're saving them for the other person.
Curious if has there been a reach out to the commercial businesses around and what have they said about the demand?
Yeah, so that's actually on our agenda next. So first we wanted to make sure that we presented it to our community, our TAC, our governance committee to make sure that you guys even want to move forward with these concepts. I could present them at the end of this presentation. You can say, I don't like this proposal, or I don't want this in this area. And we'll accept that feedback. We'll change the concepts and proposals. But we want to make sure we got that feedback first before we engage the business owners.
It seems the right thing to do is to pin that need down and get commitments to work as a partnership almost. Hey, we're gonna come in and do this, and what can you do for us here?
And I think what you'll find when we get later into the presentation is we're hoping that this is gonna be an incentive. It's not a requirement. This is an incentive on the property owner. They can choose to develop under these standards or not. They can continue to keep it as a commercial use.
If it's such a need that that the commercial aspect of this would lend a hand as a partner to incentivize.
Maybe.
I think Jenna hit it spot on that. I mean, the reality is UG and Springfield are pretty small metro areas, and you see a lot of small businesses in downtown Springfield and UG that are grassroots, family owned, startup, and some of them really struggle, retail, bakery, goods, and trips are everything. And if you have more people living there that don't have to travel to it, don't have to worry about parking, that's synergy. Yeah, an example is years ago, I was a partner firm in Virginia and Charlottesville, and Charlottesville has a little Main Street. They made it pet decades ago. And the businesses were hurting. They were starting to leave. They had a mall, and they changed the zoning to allow the buildings downtown to allow residential, and they did a lot of conversions, and it just changed the businesses. And you go down there on any evening, there's maybe 20 restaurants, and they were just packed, and there are a lot of them for people who just live right there. So I hope a lot of the commercial businesses, with their own ability to do what they want to do, having flexibility, would support it to say, I want to rebuild, I want to put housing above. And it could help my business, it could give me another financial income, an income stream, but I think it really helped Springfield downtown.
Is Peace Health looking for more housing?
Not right now. That is not what we've heard. Any other questions? Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna have us pause the recording. We're gonna take a break. Actually, we moved through this pretty quickly, which is awesome. July at the end. Went to the governance committee at the end of July. On the 5th, we had National Night Out. On the 6th, we had the plaza downstairs. It was our Indigenous Cultural Day. On the 7th, we took this presentation to our city club at Roaring Rapids. Occasionally, I think once a month or bi-monthly, they have presentations. So I think the next one, I think might be this Thursday or next Thursday. The mayor's presenting, so you might want to go see that if you have an interest. And then today, also this morning, I was down in the plaza for our last plaza event. That was the symphony. So, all right, moving on to the next part of the presentation. So we're going to get into the code concepts themselves to hear from you on how we can balance commercial and housing needs to reflect the community priorities we discussed earlier. Okay. So Cascadia Partners, our consultant, found 6 potential code concepts to address, but today we're only going to be addressing 2 of the concepts. And they are about expanding opportunities for housing in our commercial districts and then reducing barriers to housing in our mixed use districts. The other 4 concepts, they're going to be explored and available for review when we have the code and plan concepts report ready. And that will likely go to the Planning Commission and City Council in September. So why are we considering the commercial and mixed use districts? These areas are already planned for shops, businesses, and a mix of uses, as a lot of you guys already mentioned. Some of these areas already even have housing as part of an existing mixed use building or standalone housing development. If you guys have driven down Main Street, I know that you might have been stopped at a stoplight and seen some housing just sitting there in a mixed use development or standalone housing project. A lot of those housing developments are a little older, but you kind of get the idea of they're existing in our commercial districts right now. That makes them logical places to consider adding more housing near our existing jobs and services, without major changes to how Springfield uses land. So as Basil mentioned, we want to be able to have housing near our transportation options, and Main Street is a big, major thoroughfare. So, as I mentioned earlier in our presentation, our current regulations for housing in commercial and mixed-use districts run along a continuum. So I love this graphic because it talks about where we are the most flexible to the least flexible when it comes to housing. So again, on the left-hand side, our existing residential districts are the most flexible, right? Makes sense. You could have multifamily, you could have standalone housing, you could have some of our middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, things like that in our residential districts. And then on the far right, our existing commercial and industrial, these are the most restrictive. Again, generally, we don't allow housing in these areas. And then in the middle, leaves the existing mixed-use areas or mixed-use districts. These include our mixed-use residential, our mixed-use commercial, and our mixed-use employment districts, generally in downtown, Mohawk, Glenwood, and our Booth Kelly mixed-use district in downtown. That used to be our former mill. Okay, so moving on to how we plan to address this for this project in particular. Again, we're going back to the concepts and running along that continuum of how we could allow housing in our commercial and mixed use districts. Again, on the left, we're the most flexible when it comes to residential. On the right, we're the most restrictive when it comes to commercial and existing industrial districts. Then for our climate friendly areas, that's the dark blue. We're exploring opportunities to allow housing either as a standalone use or as part of a mixed use development. And Sandy will elaborate on that in the next slide. Keeping in line with that concept, we could explore this option in the community commercial district along Main Street. So we could allow standalone or mixed use down Main Street. The other options for consideration, as you'll see in the turquoise color and orange, are to make mixed use development more feasible and to allow mixed use development in neighborhood commercial districts throughout the city. Think about this. We're going to come back to it and I'm going to have Sandy present.
Good evening. My name is Sandy Balson. I'm a comprehensive planning manager, and Chelsea Hartman is actually the project manager for the climate friendly areas. But since I'm here anyway, I'm presenting on her behalf. So we have identified 3 areas to serve as our climate friendly areas. One is the primary, which we call CFA for short, in the Glenwood Riverfront area, and then 2 secondary districts, downtown and Mohawk. And so as Haley explained, these are basically from the state's perspective, replacing what we used to call nodal development. Now we're calling them climate friendly areas. So they allow for the variety of uses and the idea that you've already been talking about, where you can have a mix of jobs, living, services, all very close in proximity with high quality access to transportation of different sorts. So in the Glenwood, which is our primary CFA, we already allow high density residential units, residential uses, excuse me, including 50 dwelling units per acre. And we do not currently have a maximum height. So when we were putting our climate friendly areas into our existing planning framework, we tried to match what we've pretty much already decided on a local level while we're trying to meet the state mandate. So there's some changes we're proposing in Glenwood, and right now there are 3 different zoning districts across this area, our plan districts actually, and we're proposing to combine them into one plan district that allows all of the various uses anywhere within those 3 currently different plan districts. So we would have the flexibility to allow standalone housing, commercial or mixed use buildings within that whole riverfront area. And then for our secondary climate friendly areas, these secondary areas have a lower minimum density requirement and a lower height that we would need to achieve. So with that, we would upgrade the minimum densities to meet the state requirements, but they would only be 15 units per net acre. Unlike the higher densities required in the primary. And in these areas, what we're proposing is to, on arterial streets, we would continue to require some kind of ground floor commercial or office, but to allow standalone housing in the other areas. And I will call out that this slide is different than what was in your packet. We made a change after presenting to City Club to clarify this one bullet. So, and then we would allow the mixed use or standalone commercial as we do now throughout the rest. And when I say we would allow standalone housing, I'm sorry, when this bullet is what we're talking about is in the mixed use commercial zone. So there's also a mixed use residential zone that we're proposing that is on arterials of Pioneer Parkway. And so we would not require the ground floor commercial in the mixed use residential zone on Pioneer Parkway. They could if they wanted, but it wouldn't be a requirement, only in the mixed use commercial areas. I think that's it. Okay.
All right, now we're gonna move on to the other concepts tonight. Bill, and then real quick.
Before you leave, so is there, as part of the work that the city is doing, it's only code implementation to meet this state climate friendly area requirements that they have? Is there any ability or any thought that maybe areas that are zoned mixed use residential or mixed use commercial maybe could be changed to mixed use residential to make them more likely to develop? Is that one of the things that
I mean, it
that the
could-
city's contemplating?
That could come up. Right now, we're proposing zoning to most closely match what's already there. But if a property owner is saying, hey, we want to have it be different, then this is a process to bring that up. And we will consider it.
Thanks.
All right, so the first concept that we're gonna talk about is allowing mixed use development in the neighborhood commercial district. So Jenna, I know this was something that you mentioned at our first TAC meeting. So as you can see on the map, and I apologize, it's a little hard to see on the screen, but it is in your packet tonight. So there is a stapled with all the maps. If you guys want a better look at it individually, it's in front of you. So the neighborhood commercial district is spread throughout the city. You can kind of see the little blue dots all over. And the main purpose of the neighborhood commercial district is to provide opportunities for sites to have your day-to-day commercial needs met. So think of this like your neighborhood convenience store, a coffee shop, a small business. A great example that I like to think of is Mill Street. If you guys have ever driven down there, there's like a yarn store, there's a dentist office, there's a convenience store. We used to have our school district building down Mill Street. So there's a lot of small little commercial uses down that street in particular. A lot of them are actually zoned neighborhood commercial. So this example, if we were to allow it to be a mixed use, we could have housing above an existing commercial use. So if you have an existing convenience store, we could allow housing above it. Or we could allow the housing behind an existing commercial development. So if you have your convenience store in front or your coffee shop or your yarn store or whatever, and you want to allow multifamily housing behind it, let's go for it. That is technically a mix of uses. In this option though, we would not allow standalone housing. So you can't take a neighborhood commercial store, bulldoze the convenience store and build multifamily housing. You have to continue to have some sort of commercial use still on the property. That's why we call it mixed use. One restriction that we could place on the development though, when we're thinking about that context sensitive design, is the design itself. So we could place a limit on the height of the building, so that it could not be taller than the maximum height allowed in the abutting residential district. So for instance, this could look like if the abutting residential districts, again, maximum height is 35 feet, then the neighborhood commercial district's property, even if you build a mixed use development, would also be 35 feet. So you got to think about it from that perspective of how tall is a 35-foot tall building. about 3 stories,
3 stories, yeah.
3 stories. So, you know,
That's
how you
what-
have residential neighborhoods that could say, oh, well, my view, or keeping with the character of the neighborhood, this allows it to keep with the character of the neighborhood.
Yeah, but on the flip side too, if you have to do commercial on the first floor, that's only 2 floors for residential, and it makes their performer for a development pretty limited. And if you had another floor, then they can justify the elevators and other improvements too. So it's that variable, you know, you don't wanna stuff out the residential adjoining neighborhoods that are small. I mean, 30's single family, you know, to roofs. You see it in UGM and Franklin now. I mean, a lot of it is the student-driven housing, but some of that is straight up to max height, and then right next to it is 3 stories. And for a time, that's uncomfortable, but it's not gonna stay that way.
I agree.
Let's keep going. Jenna has a question. Oh, Jenna. Yes.
Circling back. So the specific instance that I think I had mentioned in the first meeting isn't quite addressed in this necessarily. And I'll just throw it back out there for us to stew on. We don't have to answer it right now. But the scenario that I've been currently working with is that at Mill Street School, where we're putting 40 apartments, there's an outbuilding. And at that building, it would be really cool to have some sort of little commercial amenity, a little coffee shop or something like you're talking about. But we cannot because the property is zoned limited high density residential. And in that zone, you're not allowed to provide any commercial activity that is not solely for the residents of the property. So, you know, like a fitness room inside the building counts, but you couldn't have like a fitness room out there that is some sort of neighborhood fitness center, right? So it's kind of the flip side. It's like, okay, we have allowed residential use, but we're not allowed to put any commercial in it. And without requiring commercial in it, like, I don't know that we want that, but also it would be nice to be able to provide an amenity for the neighborhood. So not to get us off track, but that's the scenario.
Okay. We'll keep going. So why the Main Street corridor? I've got this question a lot. We're focusing on Main Street for a couple of reasons. The first is that housing is already permitted in some specific areas, like our mixed use designated areas. So I'll get to that on the next map, but there is a portion of Main Street where we already allow a mix of uses. There are previous plans and concepts that establish a desire for more housing in certain areas along Main, like our Main Street Corridor Vision Plan. On the screen, you can see it here. This was a plan developed in about 2015 where we were visioning what we imagined our Main Street to look like. So you'll see some of that concepts in this proposal. There's more of an opportunity for development along Main Street, especially for vacant and redevelopable parcels in our commercial areas. Again, if you've driven down Main Street, you might see some vacant properties. You might see some properties that haven't been developed, or you can imagine some commercial properties that you would like to see redeveloped into some other use, more commercial or more residential. But again, we have to still continue to take into consideration how allowing housing in our commercial districts could put pressure on our employment land. So we have to balance allowing housing, but not taking away too much commercial land so that if a business wanted to come in, they still have that opportunity to build a business. Okay, so the first concepts. And again, if you guys are focusing on the top part, you can see how we're still along that continuum of most flexible to least flexible. So this option here is the most flexible. This would allow sites that meet certain criteria to have housing. The housing could be standalone or mixed use as long as it is under 1 acre of land. The housing could be standalone or mixed use. Commercial uses would also still be allowed, but anything over 1 acre of commercial would still be required. So again, it's if you're under 1 acre along Main Street and 42nd, so you can see it in yellow here. Anything under 1 acre, we would allow standalone housing, mixed use housing, or you could continue to be commercial. If you're over 1 acre, we would still require commercial. 1 second,
All right.
let me just get through the slide. This works because we already allow existing standalone and mixed use housing. You can see it in the blue, between 42nd and 48th. That's our East Main Refinement Plan. It's technically a mixed-use district. But this would also preserve some of our employment land by limiting new uses to certain areas and site sizes. So according to state law, we are required to keep an inventory of our commercial and industrial buildable lands. And this, our inventory includes, a surplus of lands under an acre, I'm sorry. Under an acre, we have a surplus of land in the commercial and industrial districts. So that's why we are looking at properties under an acre. Questions? Yes, Ross.
So if you had a lot that was 4 acres, and is that possible to subdivide into 5 lots and then build residential?
Not, I would say not if it's in our inventory as being one of the sites that we would need for commercial. If it's already developed, then that's a different story. But if it's a vacant property, then no.
That makes sense. So in our commercial industrial buildable lands inventory, we keep an inventory of vacant, redevelopable, or developed parcels. So if it's already been developed, we generally say, well, it's already been used as a commercial or industrial use. And so right now, maybe it's vacant, and we want to redevelop it. We don't necessarily need it for meeting our inventory. It's not an absolute need versus a redevelopable or a vacant parcel. Those are the parcels that we need in order to meet those employment needs generally. So,
What's the vintage of the data in the commercial industrial lands inventory and how, I mean, do we have a whole lot of confidence that it's current? Chip could probably tell you that there is a surplus of supply for a variety of different commercial, maybe and industrial lands, but certainly commercial and of all price points and all different, quality and everything. And that's why we've been seeing this, we were hearing earlier about the developments that are going on in Eugene. These high rises are moving into commercially zoned lands where it is allowed and it's not here. I would sort of, and I think the city has also amended the code recently because of state law requirements that regardless of 1 acre or not, if it was income restricted, qualified, affordable housing, it doesn't matter how big it is, they could build on this commercial land and be given carte blanche to do so. I think the question maybe is, why would we not want to allow that for market rate housing as well? If there is plenty of opportunities for commerce to thrive in Springfield. And we have such a demand for housing.
yeah, as long as we don't reduce our inventory below the needs. And it sounds like Christina has a comment.
I'm happy to answer that question. The data, I think, is from 2010. Is that right, Haley? Quicker than?
I mean, for our kibble, didn't we adopt in 2016?
We did, but the data was older. I think the data
We,
is,
we started in 2008
Yeah.
collecting the data.
okay. So you're right, it is old data. The issue is under state law around statewide planning goal 2, we have to keep a consistent factual basis for our code and plan amendments. And so we can't do a piecemeal update to the commercial or buildable land need without redoing our commercial and buildable industrial, that whole industrial buildable lands, employment lands inventory. And this project doesn't have the resource to do that. So even though we know anecdotally and with some data that those site needs are not quite matched to what we probably currently need, we need to rely on it in order to be able to do something. And then when we next update that inventory, this could be the framework for more flexibility.
Well, I would just submit that, I would err on the side of most flexibility, given the fact that that data is pre-COVID, woefully out of date even before COVID, and the universe has changed of office demand, retail demand, and brick and mortar, and we have plenty of commercial land. So I think that's the fact, that's the reality of it. And if that's what if we need to kind of take the most flexible attitude to advance housing production and housing needs, I'd say let's err toward that end.
And that's the goal tonight, is to get your feedback on that. But we are not gonna create a deficit in our commercial and industrial lands. So that's again, why we're focusing on those under an acre, at least for market rate housing.
Yeah, I think the argument is you're not creating a deficit because the data's old, but it's hard to keep statistics up to what market is, but I follow hot links and the amount of commercial leasable space is massive. It is huge.
It's not moving.
Yeah, it's not, and I have developers who are building right now and they can't get tenants in it, so. Just an observation, looking at all the parcels along Main Street, I just, Arlen just kind of going down, there's almost no 1 acre parcels, there's a few. But you could collect a whole bunch of 1/4 acre or 0.15 acre parcels and do something. If you're capped at that 1 acre, just keep that in mind. You know?
And I'll just say too, one thing, as speaking on behalf of an affordable housing provider that I'm on the board for, to do a decent sized commercial apartment project, you're gonna need more than an acre and probably like twice that amount. So, I mean, it will be that a larger size. And if it's affordable housing, great, but that is so hard, and Springfield's been so generous and helpful to try to make those projects happen. But to get the capital stack to do that takes a long time.
I mean, I think that's why we're hoping to allow standalone housing again, as opposed to just mixed use, where I could say you have to continue to have that commercial on the ground floor.
Exactly.
Here, we're gonna allow you to do standalone housing, where normally can't have it.
That is good, yeah.
I was gonna say, I think if you want to look at that with Cascadia Partners for I'm just looking at what we have a surplus of and some of the other assumptions. It might be helpful to get feedback on would it be worthwhile looking at whether standalone housing could go up to 5 acres? Because you have 44 surplus industrial sites and a deficit of 2 commercial in the kibble. There were other assumptions that you would meet the demand for those commercial with rezoning, like with market-driven rezoning of industrial sites. So I'm wondering if you want to I think you could talk to Cascadia Partners about offering a suggestion of changing that 1 acre, maybe making it bigger, if we could get some backing for how it's a reasonable assumption that the market would drive those surplus industrial to commercial if it was needed.
I think showing them examples of where they have built that in Eugene, where they're larger footprints or locally, would definitely help them to see that, yeah, developers are struggling with performance to get them to balance with steel prices and everything else, but that may help them, just give more information.
All right, let's keep going. So the next option is kind of your mid-range concept. So this one will allow more housing in certain mixed-use areas, but again, it's more limiting than the first one, which was the most flexible. So this one, we would allow mixed uses in our East Main refinement plan, that's between 42nd and 48th. This is an existing mixed-use area. And then part of the Main Street Corridor Vision Plan, which I mentioned earlier, developed in around 2015, they proposed between 14th and 23rd to be another mixed-use area. So if you're driven down Main Street and you're thinking about where does traffic slow down, it's around 20th Street, where 20th Street, we turn into a 5-lane highway, but if you're going back down, it changes back into a 2-lane street. It goes from about 35 miles an hour down Main Street back down to 30 miles an hour. I'm sorry, in this area. And around this area, you see a lot more housing, standalone housing, multifamily housing, more people walking. 14th is a major kind of shopping area, shopping center. So kind of encouraging, again, a slowdown of traffic, more pedestrian usage in those areas. Again, so just in those areas between 42nd and 48th and between 14th and 23rd, we would allow standalone housing, mixed use housing, and commercial. Outside these areas continues to be commercial. You on that for a minute?
I like the more flexible option.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, want to keep going so we can get through the rest of the concepts and come back to discussion. So the most limiting or most restrictive option would be to allow more housing in certain mixed-use centers. So our Main Street Corridor Vision Plan, again, which I mentioned earlier, identified certain intersections. These are 21st, 30th, and 42nd as mixed-use areas or mixed-use centers. So at these intersections in particular, we would allow standalone, mixed use, and commercial. Outside of these, continue to be commercial. Again, though, you have to consider that at these intersections are there usually a lot of redevelopable or vacant parcels in these areas. You might be thinking about 30th, 32nd. We just had some vacant land right there, and it's just recently been developed into a car wash and a coffee shop. Yeah. So be thinking about those intersections in particular. Do you see an opportunity for more redevelopment or development at those areas?
That's at 32nd, they did,
21st, 30th, and 42nd.
no, the coffee shop, where did that?
30th, 32nd. It's like right, so you'll see Bob
Kiefer
Straub.
or Bob
Yeah, Bob
Straub?
Kiefer. Yeah. Sorry, Bob Kiefer, yeah.
Yep.
Like our YMCA, but for Springfield. So I'm gonna move on to the discussion questions. I'm gonna read these real quick, and again, let's talk about it. So for the neighborhood commercial district, do you support exploring the proposed change to allow mixed-use buildings in neighborhood commercial district? Do you have any concerns about this change? And the second question, for Main Street, which, if any, alternatives do you support for allowing housing on Main Street? Do you think the development code should be more or less flexible than today with regards to housing on Main Street? So we sort of talked about some of this stuff already, but I'll go back to, what are our thoughts about neighborhood commercial? Anything about that? Mixed use development, so it could be above an existing commercial use, it could be behind a commercial use, but it cannot be standalone housing. Has to be some mix of uses.
Neighborhood commercial struggle a lot of times, corporate density around them. It kind of gets at Jenna's concept, it just reinforces having neighborhood commercial. So I think that's a win-win, site specific, of course.
I definitely like this proposal. I think one of the things that I'm personally thinking about is a little bit of NIMBYism and trying to get over that. So how are we integrating with the needs of the community in mind? And if there's pushback, how do you assuage them that like this is actually helping you, it's reinforcing the neighborhood identity? And if it isn't reinforcing that, is it a change for the better? So like we were talking about building heights, with like the student area in Eugene. It's a pretty big departure from what's around, but at the same time, it is massively helping the community. So just realizing that, this would be a change for the better, and how do you communicate that efficiently? Because this isn't. So.
I've always liked the idea of living close to where you consume or having, commercial near where you live. I'm in a neighborhood where we really can't walk to anything. It'd be great. But I also really appreciate some of the sensitivities you mentioned about the fabric of that neighborhood. Not letting one dominate the other in either direction. And, yeah, I love the idea of having a little more nodal, being able to walk places in general is a great concept.
Any other thoughts about neighborhood commercial program?
Yeah, I'd just suggest, that maybe, I mean, I don't know of the universe of neighborhood commercially zoned properties in Springfield, how many are vacant entirely? And to get a new neighborhood commercial use to come in, sometimes it's just difficult to do. Given a surplus of other sites that maybe are already developed. So to build something new might be tough. And if there's a vacant site that might be eligible for a standalone residential use. And you see this all over in every city where something maybe was once upon a time a really cool little bodega neighborhood store. But now is just a home or part of a residence. And so things change like that. And I think if you just simply allowed for these standalone commercial uses to occur, and allow for mixed use to occur, as Jen is proposing, and maybe elsewhere, and just let the needs and market dictates, kind of play themselves out.
Gonna,
Yeah, I think Phil just sort of made the comment. I was thinking, like, neighborhood commercial, there's not really a district, is there? I mean, it's really just site by site, unless I misunderstand it. And so, yeah, that's the tricky part. In order for someone to do a commercial use in a neighborhood, they have to get their site rezoned, right? It's not just a simple, application to open a coffee shop in a residential neighborhood. And yeah, so somehow letting, like, a lot of this conversation is about introducing more residential, right? Like making other zoning more flexible with respect to residential uses. But I think the kind of concept we're getting to with this is, how do we make a tiny bit more flexibility in those residential zones that exist to allow them to be maybe more self-sustaining or more flexible or appealing. And I don't know if that fits the trajectory of this exercise, but that's it.
Just like listening to the comments that I've been hearing, one of the ideas that I had is in Virginia, there's an area around Tyson's Corner that is very built up, very walkable. It has commercial and it has residential, and it is a district. So I think what Jen is saying is, like, when you have a district, you have this area that's specifically built for it. You have it zoned, you have it ready, and we don't really have that here. So I'm just wondering, I know it hasn't really been brought up in this proposal yet, but really hammering into one specific area or thinking about a specific area where it could be created as a district to support this, potentially as a test for other areas in the community, as a model for the city, because it does work. But I'm worried that these areas are maybe too small to fully support it.
yeah, and we can, of course, look into, this is a code amendment project, so we hope to look into where can we add the little bit more flexibility with still keeping in character, like, the values of Springfield. So some of those options could be more live work options, could be more home occupation options in our code, just making sure that it's kind of keeping up with the times when we say, like, what is a home occupation or what is a live work unit? We don't usually see a lot of those types of applications or types of developments come in. Yes, Rob.
What are the developers asking for?
I don't know when it comes to neighborhood commercial. I haven't really seen a lot of those types of projects come in.
I mean, new neighborhood commercial just doesn't pencil. There's no way to make it economically viable.
Right.
Existing neighborhood commercial does, and I think there is a value to have some convenience items nearby for people to walk down to. But in terms of like a clean slate, new neighborhood commercial, the rents on those sort of spaces, they just don't work, so.
Christina?
We just had a new neighborhood commercial development in Springfield in the last couple of years. Brand new, not previously developed neighborhood commercial site that was built, and it was the Dollar General out on Main Street.
I'm not sure I'd consider that neighborhood commercial, but.
It fit within the limits and requirements of the neighborhood commercial zone, and it wasn't, I mean, you can make jokes, but that is allowed in that zone, and
No.
and it
Yeah,
met the
absolutely.
requirements.
And those guys have different models, right? They don't need to make money at every place they go into, and they might not even make money for like 5 years, so, yeah.
There's also just,
Where did that Dollar General go? Do you recall where that was?
the what?
It's in Thurston.
Oh,
And then there's another site in Thurston that has there's been like a lot of turnover, but it stayed an active neighborhood commercial market with new owners regularly. And that's on Thurston Road around 66th Street. So I think in Springfield, at least, I think the neighborhood commercial sites can be pretty profitable, and I don't think we've seen any go away.
We're actually looking for more commercial uses in Thurston, because I know that there's definitely a demand for, people want to be able to, have a place to sit down at a restaurant and eat, or they want to be able to shop in Thurston without having to drive down Main Street or come more into Springfield. So that's kind of why we focused before you hit 126 and before you hit Thurston on those commercial areas, not in Thurston. So
Well, there's, I want to add one thing, sorry.
No, good.
There are hurdles to housing, and this one actually, I have a conflict of interest, because without it, I lose money for my company. But right now, R1, R2, and R3, you can do mixed use building, but all of them require land use applications. You'll have to do site plan review, so I've talked to small builders sometimes or developers, if there's a land use application involved, they shy away or don't want to do it. And going straight to building permit is kind of rare. And I think site plan review is really important in some areas because it allows that to almost have a pre-review by the city, like early development plans. But automatically making it everywhere, that is a hurdle to small local people to do that. They don't understand what it means. They don't know how to navigate it. It adds a lot of cost. And
we're actually looking into potentially allowing I think it's minimum development standards applications as opposed, MDS applications as opposed to site plan review in some of our mixed use areas. So like you said, right now we just require site plan review, but we could allow that not quite site plan review application type 1, type 2 review as opposed to a higher review application in those mixed use areas, because that's the feedback we receive from our developers. They don't necessarily want to go through a site plan review process for something that could just be a change of use, especially in a mixed use area where we already allow multiple uses.
as a side note, Eugene's looking at stripping away site plan review overlay on a lot of properties, like in Whitaker, that they just years ago said, we need that. And then they realized it's not being developed. So.
Jenna, did you have a question? It looks like you might have your hand raised.
I just wanted to circle back to the comment about, basically that new neighborhood commercial doesn't pencil. I think it depends on how you're thinking about scale. Like for a homeowner who is just looking, potentially what if they have a property that has, 2 buildings on a site or something, and it makes it affordable for them to be able to rent one of those or turn one of those into a cool little whatever business that is beyond what would qualify as a home occupation, right? Like it allows flexibility for somebody to, that's not a new, multifamily housing project developer, but just somebody to have flexibility on their site, right? Like it doesn't always have to be that scale. And again, one very obvious example right now in this moment of something that would pencil great is we have an extra building on this site at Mill Street and we would love to make it commercial and we can't, right? Without completely repartitioning the lot and then rezoning that section of the lot into neighborhood commercial.
Yeah, redevelopment, I think there's a lot of room for it. Ground up, it gets a little more expensive.
Andy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just because Jenna's brought this up twice, that property that she's talking about is in a climate friendly area, so in our proposal for downtown climate friendly area, that would be taken care of because we would allow that mix.
She's ahead of the curve.
But
Alright.
you mean because it would be considered mixed use at that point?
Well, because in a climate friendly area, we have to allow residential and we have to allow commercial anywhere in the climate friendly area. We can restrict some residential to require the ground floor to be commercial. But we would allow commercial everywhere, residential everywhere. But what we're proposing is for those mixed use commercial zoning that we would, along arterials, we would require that ground floor commercial if you're gonna build residential up on top.
Well, that's great.
So-
How soon can we have this?
Next year, hopefully, Jenna. Yeah, we're trying, and actually, that's a good point. Thank you, Sandy. Segue, that we're trying to kind of match the adoption timelines when it comes to this project and the CFAs. So it's kind of a coordinated effort when it comes to what some of the issues are that have been brought up. They haven't quite been addressed with the CFAs, so that's what we're hoping to address here, and then match the timelines for adoption. So that's one kind of concerted effort we're we're tackling as much as we possibly can, make it as flexible as we possibly can. All right, moving on to Main Street. So I know you guys already kind of talked about this, but I'm just gonna get it again if we have time, unless you guys have more comments that you want to add. But any alternatives you support for allowing housing in Main Street? Do you think the development code should be more or less flexible today than it is for commercial?
Oh, just more.
Yeah, more flexible. More flexible.
More flexible. Perfect. Any other questions before I move on? Because we got a little bit more. No, awesome. All right, moving on to the last thing. So this other concepts, remember we talked about the first concept was allowing more housing in commercial districts. This is the second concept, and this is making mixed use development more feasible. So what does this mean? We're focusing on mixed use to help add more housing in areas that already have shop services and transit. So again, downtown, Mohawk, Gateway, Glenwood, those areas in particular. We're hoping to support our housing goals and create more well-connected communities. So a key challenge this type of development is that mixed use buildings are difficult and more expensive to build. Phil knows this quite well. So lenders see ground floor commercial space as risky when it comes for financing, making these types of projects less financially viable without additional support. So even if you did have a proposal to do a mixed use development, sometimes it just doesn't pencil. Sometimes you can't get financing and then the project might not move forward or stall out. That's what we're hoping to get some feedback on. So the first option is to reduce ground floor commercial requirements. Where housing is required to be part of a mixed use development, the amount of commercial space that must be provided can have a significant impact on the economic feasibility of mixed use development. So if market rents for new commercial space do not cover the cost of constructing and operating that space, or if the space is left vacant for a substantial period, then the economic feasibility of development will be impacted, right? You might build a mixed use building and then the commercial portion of the building could just stay vacant. The smaller amount of space will be more feasible to fill with tenants and have a relatively smaller impact on the overall profitability of a development project. So therefore, we're looking at an amendment to the code would define the minimum amount of commercial space as a portion of the total ground floor area of the building or development. So this could look like a minimum range of like 25 to 50% of a district and no more than 5,000 to 15,000 square feet of the ground floor area. And this is something that was recommended by our Cascadia partners, our consultant, depending on the relative priority for commercial uses being developed in each district. So this gives developers more flexibility to decide how much retail to include and better respond to market demand. So just less of a footprint when it comes to how much of a building we're going to require for ground floor space. Want to consider what the market will bear. The next option, allowing horizontal mixed use. So sometimes you might be asking, what the heck does this mean? Often we think of mixed use, we picture a vertical mixed use building, again, with the ground floor commercial and housing located above on the upper floors of the same building. Horizontal mixed use, as I kind of talked about in the neighborhood commercial district, you could have separate buildings with commercial and residential uses on the same site. So you could have commercial in front and you could build a residential development behind it. This gives developers more flexibility and can increase the economic feasibility. Again, let's think about some of those older buildings. Sometimes they can be a little structurally unsound and it can be a little difficult to build housing above an existing commercial use if that building's been there for a while. Hiring a consultant to confirm the structural compatibility of a building can add costs to a development. So if you drive down Main Street again, you got to consider that you can even see some of these mixed use buildings already. There's some existing commercial buildings and maybe there's a residential single family dwelling right behind it that it could have been used as a, a site manager for a commercial property. So it's an example. And then the last option, require commercial ready on the ground floor. So this could be constructing the entire ground floor space to commercial standards. We allow residential uses as a temporary use until the market demand shifts to support that commercial use. So in this way, commercial ready buildings can encourage more walkable districts. So this would look like the ground floor having a minimum height requirement. Typically, for commercial ready, that could be about 12 feet of height on the ground floor, so that you could have a commercial development come into that ground floor space, but it could be leased as residential in the meantime, or commercial, depending on what the market demands. And this is actually an example that was sent to us by Cascadia Partners. I believe this is 7 You can see kind of the commercial ready space on the ground floor, but it could be rented as a residential.
This is all part of 2 reduced barriers to housing in mixed use districts, is that right?
That's
Okay,
correct.
gotcha. If we expand opportunities for housing in commercial and mixed use districts, will there still be some areas left where commercial is like absolutely required? Are we talking about those like 1 acre parcels?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you go back to your map, even if we allow that as flexible as possible, we still need to consider how we're gonna be impacting our commercial and industrial buildable lands inventory, right? So we said we had a surplus of land under an acre.
Sure.
So that's why we said over an acre, we have to consider if we're gonna impact that inventory.
Okay.
So those areas in particular, right now, we're not sure if we're gonna allow housing, market rate housing at least. It could remain commercial.
Trying to get into the meeting.
Are you trying to remove him?
No. He might have just had lost connection.
Okay. So these last 2 questions when it comes to the concepts. For mixed use feasibility, would these allowances make mixed use development more feasible in your opinion? And then for consideration, what should we keep in mind as we incorporate these approaches into the code? Do you still think that they're creating more flexibility in the code when it comes to mixed use development?
Yeah, I like the first 2 options. It reduces some regulations for the developer and help them maximize how much residential square footage they can. Because at the end of the day, they're gonna look at their dollar per square foot. And if the goal is to provide affordable housing, the developer has to have an incentive to charge the rent cheap enough to meet that threshold, or else they're gonna charge much more towards market rate.
Yeah, I didn't find myself gravitating to the third option of mandating commercial grades construction throughout the whole first floor.
Even if you could allow housing on the first floor, even so, again, you gotta go back to, if I build it to 12-foot height requirements, I could still allow housing on the ground floor because I built it that way. It's just, you just have to be a taller building a little bit. Yes. Doug?
Well, I think, the quandary, and I'm so glad you included this picture of the Royal Building, which is the only vertical mixed-use building that's been built in Springfield the 30 years that I've been living around here.
Just got the ribbon.
But I think there's a reason why, and that's because this is qualified, affordable housing. They were able to pull that off a long time ago where it was, the conditions were more favorable. I would submit that wherever you have requirements, that you make them elective. And that you're likely to see housing get built if the market allows for that commercial to be built rather than requiring it. I like the reducing the requirement, but I would still say, don't require it, just make it elective. I like the horizontal mixed uses because I think that's again, giving an option for people to be able to introduce commercial uses and residential uses, and maybe they work better that way and they can't work in a vertical format. And the third option, whereas, you still have a fully residential building, the problem is with vertical mixed use is partly because of the code requirements between the building code, not the land use code, but the building code. And that really drives up the cost of construction and why it makes it so expensive to do and more expensive than what the market demands for the rents to be able to occupy that first floor with non-residential uses. So I would say don't do that.
Yeah, what Phil was commenting on that diagram, a bigger version of that is if you had 2-story commercial on the front, they're not occupied, office above commercial. They built that commercially and attached to it 4 stories of stick built or podium or something like that, that doesn't have commercial below it. They don't have the same fire restrictions. That's a cheaper build. That's a different build. That's a lot better for developers to allow them to do that, because there is some mixed use property of a client of ours for sale right in downtown, and it's just not selling. No one's buying it because it's more expensive to build, and all those have site review on them too. So
Yes.
Of the three options you showed, the nice boxy breakup of residential and commercial, why does it have to be one or another of them? Why can't we look at all of those depending on what somebody's wants to develop that parcel for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing, again, I go back to is our commercial and industrial buildable lands inventory. You gotta think about how right now in our districts, we're considering how those districts in particular serve a purpose, right? They meet that inventory of what we predicted we were gonna need for commercial and industrial lands. Then you take that land away and you say, now you can build housing in these areas. Well, how do we make sure that later if a developer comes in and they want to build it commercial and industrial, that they can actually find land to build their business? So it could, we're trying to, again, balance that need by saying, we're gonna allow it, but we're not gonna allow it everywhere. We're not gonna completely allow employment lands to go away.
Is that coming from your obligation to meet goal 2? Or your feelings that that's what Springfield needs to do?
I mean, I'm gonna say goal
State
2
requirement.
because we have to from the state.
So is anybody addressing this? I mean, I'm not gonna open this can of worms, but like, is anybody talking about this at the state level? Because the whole state's got a housing issue, and if this is hamstringing municipalities, it seems like it needs to go back up there to say, give us more flexibility.
My experience in trying to engage on the climate friendly and equitable communities project was that the state wasn't really interested in hearing what was specifically would help Springfield or the barriers that existed. They were interested in their ideas about what we needed.
Right.
And that if we just implemented their ideas, the problems would take care of themselves.
Correct.
So, I mean, that's a little bit, I'm probably a little biased there, but I think we did offer feedback. Maybe not this specific point, but
Sure.
things like this, or, you know,
Yeah.
that we would rather engage on a process that, you know, let us tell you how we could get more housing rather than you tell us.
Right.
And that didn't get very far, so.
Yeah.
I also think the state is looking to us. So we received a grant application to look into this. We're some of the first jurisdictions to actually work on this project. So the state is looking to see, like, what kind of feedback do we receive and what is the ultimate outcome of this project? And does that work so that they can see, could they, or do they want to carry that into the rest of the state?
Gotcha.
You could see more legislation in the next couple of years saying, yes, we want this all over the state. And how that's gonna impact those smaller jurisdictions.
Good for you guys for tackling it.
Yeah, difficult.
Question is, we're talking a lot about Springfield and commercial property and making sure we don't run out in some scenario. Is there any kind of collective regional approach to this? I mean, Springfield is proximity to Eugene and all of Lane County is not in a bubble. If Springfield for some reason is just gangbusters and successful at developing affordable housing, people can work in other communities. And so I'm wondering if there's a more regional approach or effort or anything going on with that, where we just don't simply say, well, our commercial has to stay at this level, then it stays empty forever, but we still need housing.
I think that's something the state is looking into, but Christina, it looks like you might have.
That used to be the way that we did it.
Yeah.
And then the state mandated that we get divorced, which actually helped us on the housing piece. Maybe it hurt us on the commercial piece.
Metro plan?
What?
Yes.
The metro plan, yeah, having one urban growth boundaries to do all that planning regionally. It is regional data that goes into the kibble, and they do look at regional needs and then try to assign some of that to Springfield, but we're mandated to do that planning individually, which has pros and, has pros and cons.
I think something that we could look into in the future, although it's not part of this project because we're not required to by the state to look into our industrial lands. But actually, technically, we have more industrial lands than we have of commercial and mixed use lands. And so some of those properties haven't been developed yet, although we're seeing more development in those areas now because they're large, undeveloped industrial parcels. So how that could potentially change the community as far as you're seeing more maybe commercial uses in those areas as opposed to what we would consider most of the time industrial parcels, or those large industrial parcels maybe are sitting vacant. If you are thinking about a Royal Caribbean building, you may have heard that property is for sale, I believe, and vacant. And so that was a large industrial property that we imagined to be a campus industrial type development, and considering what that development could be in the future. Danny.
I just want to make one more editorial comment. So, in terms of like what we need from the state. So I'm the planning manager. A lot of the work that we've been doing over the past 5 years has been responding to state mandates.
Yeah. You and
Personally, I don't think we need more state mandates. I would rather get the time and money resource to focus on what we think we need to do, which I do agree, we do need to update our commercial industrial buildable lands inventory. But I can't program that out until at least the 2030s, because we already, to meet state mandates, are booked up to 2030 in what our planning efforts are going to be. So, just keep that in mind of
That's a
every,
challenge for you and Eugene, because they had the same thing with their BLI, that the residential is really not accurate. They're industrial sometimes for areas that really can't be developed, when you really look at them in detail. And it skews it, it makes it hard for them, and makes it hard for you too.
I
So,
think you only need to look at the project that Jenna just finished at Fifth and Main to see there's a demand and the developer put housing on top of an existing commercial building. The commercial space is vacant.
yeah,
You know, that tells you something. So I think knowing that you're hamstrung by these state mandates, these limitations on the commercial buildable land study, but I would still err, I think, what you can control and as much as you can control, there's still all sorts of things that, financial and other things that are beyond all of our control, that are federal and so forth, that might foil our ability to produce more housing and more mixed uses that we need and want. But to make the code as flexible as it possibly could be to respond to things until the day comes, that happy day, when the state sort of gets the hell out of the way and lets things really kind of work the way they should. So.
And keep in mind, I'm the only code writer for the city of Springfield, actually. So any code amendments that keeps getting passed to the state, it probably crosses my desk. Yes.
I just had a question, is the commercial land inventory including like what percentage would be in mixed use
Yes.
districts?
Yeah, so it considers commercial, mixed use, and industrial districts, all three of those. And some of them actually allow it together. So you could have a commercial and industrial together on a mixed use employment site. Yeah.
And so is there like a set state amount of inventory you're supposed to keep? And are we like from that last census that was done, are we above that or below that?
So we can't have a deficit. So right now we don't have a deficit.
Okay.
According to our kibble. And so we did actually have to expand our urban growth boundary to meet some of those needs, especially on our large industrial properties. So if you have a map of Springfield, the area North Gateway, that area is reserved as future employment lands. And you're gonna point the map back there, that area. And then there's another one down Jasper area.
South 28th.
Yeah, that is reserved for future employment needs.
Would it be helpful for me to give a summary of the numbers?
Sure.
I've got the table up. So before those urban growth boundary expansions, so the urban growth boundary expansions were designed to meet the deficits that we had. But the surpluses are pretty much the same in those larger ones. We had a surplus of 187 industrial and 235 commercial and mixed use sites less than an acre or less. So when Haley talks about how we have surplus, like it's a huge surplus of those smaller sites. We had a surplus of 45 industrial sites in the range from 1 to 2 acres and 3 commercial mixed use sites. We had a surplus of 44 industrial sites in the range of 2 to 5 acres and a deficit of 2 sites in the commercial. And I think we actually may have met that deficit through other rezoning, but we didn't expand the UGB for any 2 to 5 acre sites. We assumed those would be met through market demand. And I think that we have actually done that since 2016, just through applications for redevelopment. So, and then when we get to 5 acres to 20 acres and 20 acres and larger, we had a deficit of sites in those. So those expansions were all for those very large sites, but there's an overall huge surplus of the sites less than 1 acre. So when Haley's talking about the surplus, like it's a
200 plus.
yeah,
Wow.
it's 400 acres extra of small commercial and industrial sites.
Why we're looking at Main Street.
There you go.
Yes, Ross.
So with the commercial and industrial, we have a minimum amount that we have to keep. What do we have for residential only inventory that is reasonably buildable?
Well, so I'll answer that one. So we've been wanting, back in 2008, we started to do inventory of all of our lands for employment and residential. We, at that time, found that we had enough residential land to meet our needed land supply. So that was adopted, first. And as Christina explained, we had a deficit, for employment. So we had to find that. So we didn't adopt the, inventory until we had expanded the UGB as part of that package. So that was adopted like 5 years later. So 2011 is when we adopted the residential land inventory, and 2016 is when we adopted the employment and commercial and UGB expansion. So we've been wanting to update our residential inventory for several years now. And the state has been doing rulemaking, so they've delayed us being able to do that. But finally, this next year, we are going to start in 2026. We are going to start under new rules that haven't yet been adopted, to update our residential land supply. And we'll compare it with the need that the state provides to us and see how they match up and figure out what to do. So this work that we're doing now is kind of a head start on meeting that anticipated deficit of housing inventory. Because when we look at the numbers the state's giving us, it's like, where are we going to put them all? So we need to find some of it, and that some of it may be in these commercial areas that you're looking at tonight.
Remember, we need about 470 new units per year to meet state standards. Correct. Okay, we're just past 7:30, so I'm gonna wrap things up, but just talk about some of the things that we need to. So in your packet tonight, you had the maps and the outreach materials. There's handouts. One is the handout. It's a 2-page with pretty colors and graphics. And the other one is about 2-3 pages of facts about the project. That has gone out at a number of events so far. It'll continue to go out on our webpage and future events that we have scheduled. And also the maps, they're also in your packet. If you guys have any feedback for me, I'm happy to take it, email, verbally, whatever you want to meet with me. Any and all, you guys have any questions about that stuff, happy to have it. The survey, we're hoping to have a survey out in the next week or so. That will go out to everybody. Please look for it. I'll send you guys an email to let you know. Please, please, please. I know you guys are developers and active in the community. Let people know about this survey. There will be a $25 gift card, Visa, 2 options to win that. So we're hoping for people to participate in that survey, and the more feedback we give, the better, because then I can share that with their planning commission and city council and say people are in favor of this or people are not in favor of this. So it helps me in my job.
Kelly, did you say there's a survey we can let people know about?
Yeah, in the next week or so. So we're trying to wrap up the questions and what will be in the survey. Most of the survey will probably be exactly what I talked to you about tonight with the graphics and the images and all that pretty stuff. So we'll basically just be making it publicly available and asking for the public to comment and give us that feedback. And then again, I have some tentative planning commission and city council meetings scheduled for the end of September. Again, we'll probably be going over these code and plan concepts. I'll be providing all that feedback, the final report to them, and making sure that we have their input and feedback, as well as your feedback, everybody's feedback. I'm hoping to schedule the next TAC meeting for September, but don't hold me to that because, everything's up in the air right now with holidays, people being on break and vacation. So stay tuned for an email from me about that. But any last minute things you guys want to?
Are you getting the feedback you're looking for?
I think sometimes people are a little confused when we say we're trying to add housing in the commercial districts. They're like, what does that mean? What are you talking about?
Yep.
Even when you're looking at the map over there. So I think maybe getting a little clearer about like which areas in particular, like this is Mohawk or this is downtown or this is Riverbend Gateway area. So I think we always want more participation, and if you guys want like the handouts, copies of the handouts, I have business cards over there. We're hoping to meet with the business owners down Main Street again in the next couple of weeks to get their feedback, because we really need their input on this. Again, we're hoping this is gonna be an incentive. We do not want the business owners to be like, this is a discouragement, I don't want this project. We want them to say, this is encouraging your options. This is allowing for flexibility where right now you don't have that flexibility. But again, it's completely up to you, the property owner, if you wanna apply for these development options. So yes, we want as much feedback as possible. So yeah. Just follow up with me if you guys have any.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, adjourn. Stop the recording. Thank you very much, and I'll keep you guys posted on the next meeting.